Hey, folks. As promised, I'm going to bring you a couple of narratives of actual soldiers, first person accounts from the Battle of First Manassas. I think it brings a little life to the history, which can be a little dry if you don't have first person accounts. And then it's one of the reasons we're going to engage literature a little later on in the course once you have enough background, so that you can really get in the mind of somebody who what they would be going through as they're experiencing this. But in lieu of that, and until we get to that, I think it's nice to hear a couple of first-person accounts, and so let me just read them to you. First is from Samuel J. English, who is a corporal in Company D of the Second Rhode Island Volunteers. Shortly after the battle, he wrote his mother a letter describing his experience. We join his story in the early morning hours before the battle. Sunday, the 21st, about 2 o'clock. The drums beat the assembly, and in 10 minutes we were on our march for Bull Run, having heard the enemy were waiting to receive us. Our troops, then numbering 25 or 30,000, which were divided into three columns, ours under Colonel Hunter, and taking the right through thick woods. About 11 o'clock, as our pickets were advancing through the woods, a volley was poured in upon them from behind a fence, thickly covered with brush. The pickets, after returning the shots, returned to our regiment, and we advanced double quick time, yelling like so many devils. Our arrival, on our arrival into the open field, I saw, I should judge, 3 or 4 thousand rebels retreating for a dense woods, firing as they retreated, while from another part of the woods a perfect hailstorm of bullets, round shot and shell, were poured upon us, tearing through our ranks and scattering death and confusion everywhere. But with a yell and a roar, we charged upon them, driving them again into the woods with fearful loss. In the meantime, our battery came up to our support. A battery is a whole bunch of cannons. Um, and commenced hurling destruction among the rebels. Next, orders were given for us to fall back and protect our battery as the enemy were charging upon it from another quarter. And then we saw with dismay that the 2nd Rhode Island Regiment were the only troops in the fight, the others having lagged so far behind that we had to stand and fight alone for 30 minutes, 1,100 against 7 or 8,000. It was afterwards ascertained from a prisoner that the rebels thought we numbered 20 or 30,000 from the noise we made by us while making the charge. And I think this speaks to the ignorance of the common soldier compared to, maybe what a general or somebody like that would know. They don't know anything about the numbers of the troops or how many or what. And so there's a little bit of exaggeration going on here that I think is interesting. While preparing to make our final effort to keep our battery out of their hands, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment then came filing over the fence and poured a volley out to them that drove them under cover again. They were followed by the New York 71st and the Hampshire 2nd regiments, with 2,000 regulars bringing up the rear, who pitched into the secessionists. That's apparently what they called them, seshers, most beautifully. Now, the regulars, I didn't really mention this in my lecture because it was, there's too many details in a battle to get them all in there. But there were 2,000 regulars or thereabouts who were trained soldiers from before the war, and they fought the best in the entire Union Army in the Battle of First Manassas. That's no surprise. They actually kept a battery of guns protected for a good long while, even though they were outnumbered and not surrounded, but they were being shot at from three sides. So pretty impressive. Our regiments were then ordered off the field and formed in a line for support to rally on in case the rebels overpowered our troops. When the line had formed again, I started off for the scene of action to see how the fight was progressing. As I emerged from the woods, I saw a bombshell strike a man in the breast and literally tear him to pieces. I passed the farmhouse, which had been appropriated for a hospital, and the groans of the wounded and dying were horrible. I then descended the hill to the woods, which had been occupied by the rebels at the place where Ellsworth's Zouaves made their charge. The bodies of the dead and dying were actually 3 and 4 deep, while the woods, where the desperate struggle had taken place between the U.S. Marines and the Louisiana Zouaves, the trees were spattered with blood and the ground strewn with dead bodies. The shots flying pretty lively round me, I thought it best to rejoin my regiment. As I gained the top of the hill, I heard the shot and shell of our batteries had given out, not having but 130 shots for each gun during the whole engagement. As we had nothing but infantry to fight against their batteries, the command was given to retreat, our cavalry not being much use because the rebels would not come out of the woods. The Rhode Island regiments, the New York 71st and the New Hampshire 2nd, were drawn into a line to cover the retreat, but an officer galloped wildly into the column, crying the enemy is upon us, and off they started like a flock of sheep, every man for himself, and the devil take the hindermost. Hindermost means the one who's farthest back in line. while the rebels shot and shell fell like rain among our exhausted troops. As we gained the cover of the woods, the stampede became even more frightful, for the baggage wagons and ambulances became entangled with the artillery and rendered the scene even more dreadful than the battle, while the plunging of the horses broke the lines of our infantry and prevented any successful formation out of the question. The rebels, being so badly cut up, supposed that we had gone beyond the woods to form a fresh attack, and shelled the woods for a full 2 hours, supposing we were there, thus saving the greater part of our forces. For if they had begun an immediate attack, nothing in heaven's name could have saved us. As we neared the bridge, the rebels opened a very destructive fire upon us, mowing down our men like grass, and caused even greater confusion than before. Our artillery and baggage wagons became fouled with each other, completely blocking the bridge, while the bombshells bursting on the bridge made it rather unhealthy to be around. As I crossed on my hands and knees, imagine this, the guy crawling across the bridge, hiding from the enemy fire and shells. Captain Smith, who was crossing by my side at the same time, was struck by a round shot at the same time and completely cut in two. After I crossed, I started up the hill as fast as my legs could carry and passed through Centerville and continued on to Fairfax, where we had arrived about 10 o'clock, halting about 15 minutes. Then kept on to Washington, where we arrived about 2 o'clock Monday noon, more dead than alive, having been on our feet 36 hours without a mouthful to eat and traveled a distance of 60 miles without 20 minutes halt. The last 5 miles of that march was perfect misery, none of us having scarcely strength to put one foot before the other. But I tell you, the cheers we received going through the streets of Washington seemed to put new life into the men, for they rallied and marched to our camps, and every man dropped on the ground, and in one moment the greater part of them were asleep. Our loss is estimated at 1,000, but I think greater. The rebels lost from 3 to 5,000. Now that's not accurate at all. Actually, the Union lost more soldiers than the rebels did. And when they talk about casualties, remember that casualties are the total number of injured, missing, and dead. It's not just dead guys. But that was one narrative. I'm going to read you a couple of more. I think that was a long one. So a week after the Battle of Bull Run, a humiliating defeat for the Union forces, 23-year-old officer William Thompson Lusk of the 79th New York Infantry wrote a letter copied below to his mother detailing his first experience in combat. Lusk and the 79th had been part of the William Tecumseh Sherman's brigade, which found itself in the thick of the fighting for Henry House Hill. The 79th would suffer among the highest casualties of the Union regiments engaged in the fighting, including its colonel, James Cameron, brother to Secretary of War Simon Cameron, who was killed during the battle. Lusk, who would eventually rise to the rank of captain, remained with the 79th until 1863, when he resigned his commission. The Connecticut native would return home and complete his medical studies. Lusk died in 1897 after a long and successful career as a physician. He was 59. July 28, 1861. Dear Mother, a week has passed since our misfortunes at Bull Run, and in all the intervening time, I have had only opportunity to let you know that I was safe. But I must tell you something of that unlucky day, for I know you had rather have the story from my own lips, as I promised Henry Goddard to write once in a while for the bulletin. I will put my story in the form to suit that sheet, if you think it proper to communicate it. We too have breathed into our nostrils the smoke of battle. We too have listened to the voice of the cannon. We too have seen the finest of pageants, the most splendid of dramatic spectacles, the death struggle between armed armies of men. We, who only yesterday were numbered among the sons of the Muses, find ourselves today counted among the full-fledged sons of Mars. Mars is the Greek god of war, of course. We have fought, suffered, and survived to tell our tale. Tomorrow morning at 2 o'clock, be ready for an advance. Provided with a couple of days' provisions is the command we received on Saturday evening, and at the chilly hour appointed, without the sounding of reveille, we were noiselessly summoned to our arms. We stand in silence at our posts until the red glare of the rising sun had followed the dark hour before dawn. Then we marched on, gay of heart and full of confidence. We cross Bull's Run and see men cutting trees by the bridge. We ask their reason. It's to cover our retreat, they tell us. Ho, ho, how we laughed at the thought of our retreating. Ha, ha. What innocent woodmen these were that could talk of us defeated. It was a bonny sight to see them. Bonny is an old Scottish word for beautiful. Eager for battle, dreaming of victory, some 3 miles we marched on, and then we were drawn in the woods in line of battle. The line advanced till we came to the edge of a forest, where we were told to lie down to avoid the range of the enemy's cannon. About 6 o'clock, a couple of pieces of our artillery to the left of us opened up a fire upon such an unseen foe as our skirmishers were able to discover. Long our pieces were unanswered. How glorious, we thought, this firing on the foe and ourselves in seeming safety. How we laughed when afar we could see an exploding shell scattering the enemy in confusion, who for a short moment were thus forced to show themselves on open ground. The fields before us were occupied by our officers reconnoitering. Reconnoitering means scouting. It's a fancy word for scouting. Away off on the line of the wood-covered hills 2 or 3 miles away, we could see the glitter of bayonets. Seen from a tree, they were found to belong to fine troops, well equipped and marching in order, troops not to be scattered by threats, but worthy of being combated. Upon an elevated open space of ground before us to the right, we could see more troops moving, horsemen riding, above all, one on a white horse who seemed to be everywhere. The sun grew warm and we became listless. The artillery continued to discharge its death messengers. That's a metaphor for, cannon shot. The sharp rattle of musketry was heard to our right, volley after volley, following in quick succession. Yet many of us slept quietly, awaiting our turn to be summoned into action. About 11 o'clock, 2 horses came galloping riderless toward us. While surmising whence they came, we were called to rise and march to battle. We sprung from the earth like the armed men of Cadmus. On we rushed by the flank, over the fields, through the woods, down into ravines, plunging into streams, up again onto rising meadows, eager, excited, thrilled with hot desire to bear our share in routing the enemy. We cheered and yelled, pressing onward, regardless of shells now and then falling among us, thinking only of the sharp fight and a certain victory. At last we reached the lines of the brave boys of the 69th New York Infantry. Here the American banner was planted, so we shouted lustily, for the spot had not long since been wrung from the foe. From many a point, not long since covered by secession forces, the American banner now flowed. What wonder we felt in our hearts, swelling with pride, and saw, hardly noticing horses and riders lying stiff, cold, and bloody together. Though we stepped unthinking over the pale body of many a brave fellow, still grasping convulsively his gun, with the shadows of death closing around him, we were following the foe, I have said, and were dreaming only of victory. So we were marched to the edge of a slope, which sheltered us partially from the aim of the enemy's artillery. Here, lying prostrate, shell after shell flew over our heads, or tore up the ground around. Now we could feel the hot breath of a cannonball fan our cheeks. Now we could see one fairly aimed, falling among our horses, and rolling them prostrate. And now, again, one of these messengers would come swift into the ranks of our columns, and without a thought or groan, a soul was hurried into eternity. This guy's got a really, I don't know, it sounds like a novel. He's writing in a very elevated style. He's an officer, so he's probably a little more articulate than some of the other guys who are writing memoirs. After about an hour in this trying position, we were called up and turned into the road, where death began to make sad havoc in our ranks. Surely aimed, the shot of the enemy fell among us. We could not see the foe, and then it was terrible to see our own boys, whose faces we knew and whose hands we had pressed, falling in a death agony. We heard, while marching stealthily, a great shout, and looking, we saw the hill before us covered with the Ellsworth Zouaves. A moment more, and from the top of the hill, from unseen hands, blazed terrible discharge of arms. It was one of those masked batteries which have so often brought us misfortune. Bravely fought the Zouaves, but they had to fall back from the hellish fire. Other regiments made the charge, but only to be repulsed with ranks thinned and broken. At length our turn came. Up we rushed, our brave colonel with us. The first fire swept our ranks like a quick darting pestilence. "Rally, boys, rally!" shouted the officers, and a brave rally was made. Our men stood, firmly firing, answering volley by volley. Here we felt the worthlessness of our old Harper's Ferry muskets. Harper's Ferry was a armory, and the weapons that were there were relatively old, and so these aren't the best muskets ever. Which matched against the rifles of the enemy. Tall men were mowed down about me. Wounded men begged their comrades to press on, and not to risk anything by lingering near them. We were only some 20 yards from a battery, belching forth a thick, heavy hail of grape and canister. Grape and canister shot it's like if you filled a can with a bunch of steel marbles or ball bearings, and then you fired it out the end of a cannon. It's kind of like a shotgun, except the shotgun is the size of a cannon, and it's blasting into your ranks of soldiers. It's a very deadly anti-infantry weapon to be used at close range. Shell fire and musketry. With unerring accuracy, the enemy's riflemen singled out our officers and mighty men. Suddenly, we saw the American flag waving over the battery. Cease firing was the order given, and for a short moment we believed the battery was ours. It was the enemy, though, that had raised the flag to deceive us. As we lowered our arms and were about to rally where the banner floated, we were met by a terrible raking fire against which we could only stagger. By the Lord, but I believe them coons too cunning for us, cried an old soldier near me. We halted. We fell back, and the hillside was left to such only as lingered to bear away their wounded comrades. As we passed down, we saw our colonel lying still in the hands of death. He had fallen bravely, breast to the foe, not wishing to cherish his own life while the lives of his men were imperiled. Over the sad, disheartening retreat, let us not linger. Let it be covered by the darkness of the night which followed. We took with us 750 brave men into the battle, but our roll call shows that 199 are numbered among the dead, the wounded, and the missing. 6 captains of ours are silent now when their names are called. They died with many of their men, careless of death, willing to give up all things, even life, in its sweetness, for the good of the Republic. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. That's Latin. It comes from a Roman writing by Cicero, I believe. I think it translates to, it is sweet and honorable to die for one's country, which is, a bold statement. So he signs off his letter. I've got one more from the Confederate perspective, and then we're going to call this thing over. And it sounds like I've got some emails to answer. All right. Let's see. This one's from Special Collections, Murray's of Woodstock Farm, West River Collection, Family Papers. Letter from William H. Murray, 26 July, 1861, Fairfax Courthouse. This is what he writes. And I'll try and put on a southern accent, although people from the South will probably beat me for it. Fairfax, July 26, 1861. My dear cousin, being on the sick list today from rheumatism in the left arm, I shall employ my right arm to the grateful task of thanking you for your timely present, which, strange to say, only reached us yesterday. Long before you get this, you will have heard about the Battle of Bull's Run, and our glorious victory with all of its particulars. And I know you will rejoice to know that it was won principally by our brigade. Our timely arrival, rapid march, and desperate attack turned the right flank of their grand army, put them to flight, and I honestly believe that some of them are running yet. When we get home, we can tell you all about it, for it would take a large volume to note the incidents of that terrible Sunday. Although nearly all of us had never seen battle before, we stood their fire like veterans. At one time, without being able to return it, we for 10 or 15 minutes stood in perfect tempest of balls, shell, and grape, which plowed the ground all round us, with the loss of but 2 killed and 8 wounded. Billy's company did not lose a man. We had 2 dangerously wounded, and it was hard to march by and leave them in their blood. But when our turn came, our colonel gave the word forward, double quick, march. With a shout of vengeance for dear old Balto that we had heard for a mile down the line, we went at them in a run and swept them from the field. They hardly turned round to fire, but dropped everything they had and ran away from us, whilst our artillery mowed them down by the hundreds. We cut some of their regiment all to pieces. The celebrated Ellsworth Fire Zouaves lost over 700. The 71st, 79th, and 12th New York regiments more than one half, and the few of the main men must have gone into Washington naked, for we have everything they could have had: clothes, arms, knapsack, provisions, tents, even their medicines and pocketbooks, daguerreotypes and love letters. Some of their letters are rich, of which we have cartloads. I will try and save some for you. You may depend, we are proud of our victory, and the Balto boys are on everyone's lips. They don't seem here to know how to take us. And as we work cheerfully and never complain, we have nearly all the hard work to do. By the way, Beauregard told our colonel he was the Blucher of the day. Now, that was a Prussian cavalry officer that saved the day at Waterloo, that famous battle that defeated Napoleon. So it's a metaphor. They're talking about some famous Napoleonic battle. And made him a brigadier general on the spot. You ought to have heard the cheers as he and General Beauregard rode down our line in the gallop, waving their hats and crying, "Boys, we've whipped them." But oh, bet the dead and the wounded. God grant our country may never see such another field. They lay some in heaps piled in gullies where their friends had thrown them, some in long rows where the grape and round shot had plowed them down, dead and dying all together. Now, it sounds terrible that they threw them in gullies, but that's where they safe from shots that might fall or fly over them. If you're in a depression in the ground, you can't get hit as easily. It's like being in a trench. Let's see. Some lay on their faces, biting the sod and clutching the grass. Some on their backs, as calm as though they had fallen to sleep with their hands folded on their breast, and their glassy eyes turned up to the quiet sky that seemed to smile down upon them. And some stone dead in the position they had sat down, leaning upon their hands, with chins upon their breasts. I saw 6 horses and 8 dead men under one little tree beside the wounded. But I must stop, for I've used up my last bit of paper. We'll ride again by the first opportunity. Boys, all well. Love to all. Tell Aunt Mary to be proud of her boys. Your affectionate cousin, W.H. Murray. All right, that's all of them. So I'm going to let you, think about that. But it brings it to life a little bit. It makes you feel like maybe you were there, or you heard an account of somebody who was there, instead of some, stuffy sort of history that shows just battle movements and outcomes and things like that. And I think that's important. All right, thank you.